Why Georgie and Mandy's first marriage is more relatable than young Sheldon and the Big Bang Theory. Love isn't always a fairy tale, and that's why Georgie and Mandy work. In the world of sitcoms and spin-offs, it's rare to find a relationship that genuinely reflects the raw, messy, beautiful chaos of real life. But young Sheldon's newest spin-off, Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage, offers something we haven't seen much of in the Big Bang Theory universe: relatability. Not in the form of physics jokes or awkward nerd banter, but through a young couple trying to figure out marriage, parenting, and adulthood all at once. While young Sheldon gave us the origin story of a genius and the Big Bang Theory elevated the quirks of nerd culture into primetime comedy, Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage flips the script. It doesn't focus on intellect, science, or a comic book collecting clique. Instead, it brings things back down to earth, to a trailer in Texas, to a young couple who didn't plan any of this, but are doing their best anyway. This is the most grounded, emotionally accessible story in the TBBT franchise so far, and here's why it might just be the most relatable. 1. They didn't choose the timing, life did. Georgie and Mandy's journey didn't begin with a grand romance or slow burn love story. It began with a surprise pregnancy, uncertainty, and a whole lot of awkward. Unlike Sheldon and Amy, whose relationship was slowly and systematically constructed over years of odd romantic steps and negotiations, Georgie and Mandy's union was anything but calculated. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't planned. And for most people, that's real life. Whether it's an unplanned baby, an early marriage, or sudden responsibility, many people find themselves thrown into adulthood sooner than expected. Georgie and Mandy didn't start as soulmates, they started as two people trying to do the right thing. That's powerful. That's vulnerable. That's relatable. 2. They're broke, and it's not a joke. Let's be honest. No one ever knew how the gang in the Big Bang Theory could afford those apartments in Pasadena. Penny was a waitress. Sheldon and Leonard were postdocs. Somehow they all lived pretty comfortably, the most relatable financial crisis being a few missed rent payments or awkward gifts. Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage introduces a more grounded reality. Georgie works at the tire shop and struggles to support a baby, a fiancé, and himself. Mandy, trying to reclaim some sense of independence, also wrestles with what it means to be a young mom and career woman. Money is tight. Bills are scary. Every dollar matters. In a world of sitcoms with invisible incomes, this show remembers how hard it is to just get by, especially when you're young and responsible for more than just yourself. 3. Marriage is a learning curve, not a victory lap. One of the most refreshing parts of Georgie and Mandy's relationship is that marriage isn't portrayed as the finish line, it's the beginning of something messy and complicated. In the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon and Amy's wedding felt like a culmination, the prize after years of weird, scientific flirtation. Howard and Bernadette had their own quirky romance that mostly centered around navigating Howard's immaturity. But those stories often treated marriage like a victory, a sitcom, happy ending. For Georgie and Mandy, marriage is the battlefield, not in a negative way, but in a we don't know what we're doing, but we're in this together way. They fight. They forgive. They make mistakes. They show up anyway. That's what most people's first years of marriage look like, not perfectly choreographed romance, but two people learning how to live as one, often while carrying a baby at 3 a.m. 4. They're trying to break generational cycles. Young Sheldon revealed a lot about George Sr. and Mary's rocky marriage, the silent tensions, the religious guilt, and the emotional distance that haunted the Cooper household. Georgie grew up in that environment. He saw what didn't work. And now, he's trying to do better. That's another deeply human part of Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage. It's about trying to raise your kid better than you were raised, even when you don't know exactly how. Georgie doesn't have a perfect blueprint, and sometimes he slips. But he's present, loving, and invested in being a better dad than his own father had time to be. Mandy, too, is navigating the shadows of her upbringing, learning to lean on others, to soften her sarcasm into vulnerability. Watching them parent together isn't just sweet, it's raw and familiar for anyone trying to rewrite their family history. 5. They didn't fall in love first, they grew into it. Perhaps the most touching and real part of Georgie and Mandy's story is that their love wasn't instant. When we met Mandy, she didn't even like Georgie. He lied about his age. She dumped him. Then life threw them into a situation they couldn't back out of, and from that chaos, something deeper began to grow. They didn't fall head over heels. They fell into reality. But through co-parenting, late-night talks, shared frustrations, and quiet moments of tenderness, they built something honest. This isn't romantic fantasy. It's romantic resilience. It's two people who started with nothing more than obligation and ended up building love the long, slow way. For many people, that journey rings far truer than any love at first sight cliché. 6. They live in the shadow of Sheldon's genius, and that's the point. One of the most interesting meta-narratives in young Sheldon, and now the spin-off, is that Georgie lives in the shadow of a genius, and he knows it. He dropped out of high school. He sells tires. He's not quoting Newton or playing Dungeons and Dragons with physicists. But Georgie and Mandy's first marriage allows us to see something often forgotten in TBBT. Brilliance comes in many forms. Georgie might not be a genius, but he's emotionally intelligent. He's resilient. He shows up for his kid. He listens to Mandy. He fixes what he can and tries to grow past what he can't. That kind of everyday strength is just as admirable, maybe even more so, than solving string theory. And for many people watching, Georgie is the Cooper brother they can actually see themselves in. 7. They argue, but they don't quit. Another reason this show feels so emotionally grounded is that it doesn't shy away from the ugly parts of love. Georgie and Mandy fight. They miscommunicate. They let their stress get the better of them. But they also come back to each other. They talk it out. They apologize. They adjust. The idea that love is maintenance, not magic, is so important. Too often in TV relationships, couples break up over sitcom-sized misunderstandings or are magically perfect. But real love lives in the in-between, in the staying. In the effort. Georgie and Mandy model that effort beautifully. 8. It speaks to a whole generation that was overlooked in TBBT. When The Big Bang Theory became a hit, it was largely because it appealed to a generation raised on Star Wars, X-Men, and awkward geekdom. But in the process, it often ignored viewers who didn't see themselves in academia or niche pop culture. Georgie and Mandy's first marriage opens the door to a different kind of audience, people working hourly jobs, people raising kids young, people figuring things out one day at a time. The jokes are still sharp, the characters still lovable, but the context is new. And needed. It's a love letter to everyday folks trying to make life work without a Nobel Prize or quirky roommate antics. 9. They're not trying to be a perfect couple, just a real one. What makes Georgie and Mandy so special is that they're not aspirational, they're authentic. They're not meant to be idolized. They're meant to be understood. There's something comforting about that. For anyone who's ever loved messily, married young, struggled to make ends meet, or tried to be a better parent than their own, Georgie